I came into art. I feel like I was always drawing as a child. And my work kind of straddled the lines between visual arts, movement, and performance. Yeah, mainly those two strands. As I got older, it started to involve also like research and writing and that kind of thing as well. But the lines between strategic art forms have always been blurred for me. And when I was doing my master's in Cardiff, one of the things I came into was this idea of how do I combine my movement stuff with my drawing stuff? How do I combine my visual arts with my performance? And the main answer, the most obvious answer was Carnival. I don't know how many of you are aware of Carnival. There are, of course, carnivals in the UK, and there are carnivals, in Europe. And of course, there are masquerades and masquerade traditions in Africa. And there are manifestations of the carnivalesque in India as well, and a lot of other cultures. And so Carnival in Trinidad manifests itself as an emancipation celebration. So it's rooted in, the festival is rooted within the enslaved peoples being free. Our genesis is called Canboulay, and Canboulay comes from a word which means procession. Early historians kind of said that Canboulay actually means canes burning from the French. It's been later kind of dismissed that it wasn't cane burning. Canes burning because the enslaved were mostly toiling on the cane fields, within the cane fields. And there were processions that happened often at night when the canes were burning, that they did to put the fires out from the cane fields. Some people say they process to light the canes, and some people say they process to take the flames out, right? So there's that. So Canboulay is the ritual beginning of the carnival. And I'm talking about Canboulay because when I look at my work and where my work has moved to, it has been about embracing the ritual within the thing. So the carnival itself has this tendency to, in terms of what is exported, it has a tendency to be the beads and bikinis and the feathers, which are very beautiful, but it shows only one face of what carnival is. Carnival on the island is also called Mas, M-A-S, is it comes from the word masquerade, but in the Trinidad context, it has different manifestations. So carnival as a language has become part of our vernacular. We use the word mas to describe carnival, but mas also occurs as a thing outside of carnival as well. So we will say something like, he play a mas, or he make a mas in the place, which has nothing to do with him making a costume or playing in a carnival band. It has to do with a kind of performance. So there's a quote that I always use that says that the Prime Minister made mas as she wound up the debate on no confidence motion. She wasn't in a carnival costume, right? So it was just that she was playing herself, she was getting on. There's a kind of a performance, a kind of a thing that you recognize. We kind of know what mas is not. So you can look at carnival and say, that's not mas, because mas exists within and outside of, right? And I come back to the idea of the ritual, because mas, if it's something that you can viscerally feel and viscerally know, even without a perfect definition, and also recognize as a performance outside of a carnival setting, then it's something that can be utilized in terms of its intrinsic features, right? So I'm kind of sifting through this thing, this cultural thing that's mas, and finding the gems and playing with these gems, and sometimes making mistakes and sometimes making magic with it. So within the carnival, we have different aspects of it. So the first thing coming out of the Canboulay is something called Juve. Now, Juve is the opening of the day. It's the opening of the day, and it's the opening of the carnival season. Juve happens in the liminal space between night and day. So it's a pre-dawn festivity. People within the Juve tend to be covered in mud or paint or oil. And it's that kind of not just blurring in terms of where we are, in terms of the time of day, but blurring in terms of identity. So you are human and animal, you are male and female, you are old and young. Yeah, so you exist in that kind of plurality. And you are of the earth as well, particularly when you're thinking about wearing mud. Moving from the Juve, we have the Carnival Monday and we have the Carnival Tuesday, and then it's Ash Wednesday. There are manifestations of maybe two, I'd say probably three, but I'll talk about two specific kind of characterizations. So the one I already mentioned was a kind of beaded bikini, you know, feathered thing, which is fine. And I want to just say here that there's a big debate between what we call traditional and what we call pretty mass. Pretty mass is the feathers and the bikinis, and then there's a traditional mass. The traditional mass, the dynamic is obviously that one holds on to something and the other one is more fresh and new. And when people see it, it's all about like the street party kind of a vibe. However, within, I would argue that within the pretty mass, there is still ways to access transformation and ways to access inner selves that have been suppressed simply because of the play that it permits. So it permits a kind of play outside of the everyday that allows you to access suppressed selves. Yeah, so I think it's still very, very valid. Within the traditional mass now, what we have is performances that are rooted within actual spiritual and ritual practices. So they manifest in different ways. I mean, you see them, it might be a bat, it might be a sailor, it might be something we call Dame Lorraine, which is a woman with exaggerated features, usually played by a man. You know, so this has the exaggerated breast, which is we call gros tété, or the exaggerated buttocks. And very much similar to, is it Gelede? I don't know if you know the masquerade that celebrates womanhood. I think it's Gelede in West Africa. So, you know, we see these kind of tropes. We have stick fighters, we have the Moko Jumbis. The Moko Jumbis are the stilt walking characters. And of course, in terms of masquerade traditions, we could see lineages to the continent as well, and how these things kind of transformed in the new world, in the new space, based on what we had, our bits and our pieces. So we have these traditional characters. We also have traditional characters that pay homage to the indigenous population as well. And we call them Indians. We know that term is problematic now, but they are indigenous First People. They celebrate indigenous First People, and they also celebrate the meeting of the indigenous people with the Africans as well on the island. Trinidad's history is very, very complex. So you might hear that I'm using a lot of French kind of derived words as well. Trinidad was never owned by the French. They were owned by the Spanish, and then they were claimed by the British. But in between those two phases, the French came over, they were invited over, and culturally, Trinidad is, culturally, Trinidad at that time was very French. And so the imposition of the British coming after the French meant that, the British rule after that was very, very brutal, because it had to change, the language of the island, and everything had to kind of like be morphed and changed in order to follow a new kind of governance, right? Trinidad's history is also racially very diverse as well. Okay, so we have the indigenous population, we have the enslaved Africans, and then we have indentured Africans as well coming over afterwards. Obviously, we have the mixing with Spanish, mixing with French, and mixing with British. And then we have mixing with people who were from Venezuela as well, indigenous people from Venezuela. And then we have the indentured Indians from India that came over as well as the indentured Chinese and Syrians that came over as workers. I want to talk about the whip jab. And the whip jab is a traditional carnival character who who are 4 descendants down from indentured laborers who came from India. And at the time when these indentured laborers came, much like what was happening on the rest of the island, they weren't allowed to practice their own spirituality. These indentured laborers obviously came for a better life. So in India, they were, India has a lot of caste, it's caste, right? Caste related. And they were on the bottom. And they were also Kali worshippers. So Kali is the Indian goddess. And they were Kali worshippers. Now, Kali, different sects of Kali worshippers have different things that they believe, but these ones were ones that believed in nature and healing, herbs, and those kinds of things. And they weren't allowed, like everybody else, to practice their spirituality openly. So they will go into the bush and practice their spirituality. One of their manifestations was the use of the whip. There was the use of the whip as invocation for ancestors and all the rest of it. Carnival as that space of in-between, sort of like a space for visibility. And because it was a space for visibility, you'd find that a lot of hidden traditions and rituals manifested themselves within that space because it was a space for visibility. So it may look like a jester or this or that, but the ritual that the people who were performing were doing was actually deeply rooted spiritually in their worship. Carnival became sort of like the high point of their celebration. So how Kali worship transformed into whip jab is along that line of being suppressed, being oppressed, not being able to practice, and then finding opportunities, because a lot of the things about the Caribbean imagination is about finding ways, so using bits and pieces of things and finding ways to then reveal it. The thing about Carnival is that it's 2 days, it's 3 days, it's temporary. So the whip jab are deeply rooted within the Kali worship, and they do their fasting, they do ritual preparations and baths and everything until Carnival Tuesday, and Carnival Tuesday is the high point of their celebration. What happened this year is that in Trinidad, the Carnival was cancelled. However, many of the traditional Carnival characters still came out. They came out onto the streets, they marked the spaces they usually mark, and they performed their mass, right? Because it wasn't, for them, it's not about tourism. It's not about getting paid. It's part of their annual ritual. So you can't cancel spirit. Talking a little bit more about liminality, I suppose, and the transformation within that space, I want to bring up this guy. His name is Clinton Hutton, and he's a Jamaican writer, and he's an artist as well. And he talks about rituals of representation and rituals of repossession. He talks about it in relation to our enslaved ancestors. And he asks the question, how did they cope? How did they survive? And one of the answers he comes up with is this idea of they survived, we survived because of our rituals of repossession. The ritual of repossession is about finding, it's usually about spaces of gathering, usually nocturnal gatherings, because that was when it was safer, that allowed people to dance and sing, but also to allow their bodies to be possessed again by their ancient gods and ancestors in order to move forward. We're thinking about people originally who were owned or possessed by others, property, and then finding ways to repossess themselves again. How do we find ourselves again? But in this kind of, in the kind of contemporary context, we're thinking about whatever this everyday is, and then what does it mean to find ourselves again? What does it mean to access that inner self? I think right now my work is evolving and it's changing. And a lot of what I do or play with, whether it's through pen or paper, whether it's through paint or performance, or whether it's through writing, it's continuously asking about questions of freedom, not so much freedom, but what it means to be free. And it is about finding those rituals in the things that we do to make the things that we have to do. So we talk about rituals of repossession, and we talk about recognizing work as becoming a ritual of repossession in itself. And moving towards, for me, it's about moving towards understanding ritual in the everyday. So the capacity that we have as creative people to transform spaces, but also to transform even the everyday, so that the blurring between the creative work and the work that you do generally begins to happen. That blurring begins to happen. I had this dream about, it was about me and my son. We went to bed and he was like in a grumpy mood and I was in a grumpy mood. And I had this dream thinking, oh, you know, I feel like I woke up and I told my mom, I want to do a ritual of cleaning, of cleansing, you know. I feel like I need to do something to do with scraping, like scraping things away. The walls feel like they're covered with, you know, bad, you know, not nice energy. I want to do a ritual of scraping. And I was kind of describing to her, you know, I don't know, like a palette knife and a plate or something, and just kind of like scraping, do a ritual of scraping. And she was just like, well, why don't you just clean the house? And I was like, yeah, but you know, I want to do this ritual or whatever. And then eventually I realized that she was right, that I started mopping. And in the mopping was the prayer or the energy of cleansing and clearing. And I realized as well that at that moment, you know, your sweat can be your libation, and the ritual is actually the work. The work is the ritual itself, you know? So yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now. I don't know if I said anything to you and you understand anything about my work, but I think that is the essence, the kind of the underpinning of the stuff that I do. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Don't hold back too much. I think it's amazing you've already touched on so many elements that have come out with all the speakers. The mixing and blending together of different creative, God, I'm hot today. What's that thing you say? Disciplines, of different disciplines that are otherwise often seen as separate. That's one element that has been central to everything we've heard from different artists so far. And also finding a space of memory, intuition, and almost a dreamlike dance that allows you to reconnect to a kind of heritage, which is, like you said, visceral and felt rather than something that has to be known consciously. I hope, guys, you have questions, but I have one already. You spoke about the first 3 days of Carnival, and I'm wondering, is there something that happens in the fourth day, a coming back out of the state, and what is being held on? And what does it look like when Carnival ends? And how does it then move into everyday life again?
So the fourth day would be Ash Wednesday. And usually the ritual within the space is about going to the beach. So, I mean, it sounds very kind of like whatever, but it isn't. It is very significant. It's the idea of the washing and the cleansing. Because if you think about the kind of adaptation of Carnival within the kind of Christian Catholic calendar, it's seen as the time of excess before you purge, before the 40 days of fasting and what have you. And so the ritual of kind of like washing and cleansing is sort of like about, yeah, getting ready again to start fresh, you know? And then, to be honest with you, there are...
Have you ever been to the Carnival in Brazil?
I haven't been to the Carnival in Rio or Bahia in Brazil. It's very different. Brazil Carnival is you have the massive floats and you have the samba schools, and it's that kind of parade. But that is just what's exported, just like we have the pretty mass in Trinidad. That's the bit that's exported. In the in-between bits, there's loads more going on that I think would resonate much more to me and the kind of carnival that I understand. You know, she talked about people wearing the simplest of costumes, like a t-shirt and a hat or something to tie around your head. And that everybody has this kind of universal look. as part of it. But then you can do little things to make it yours, you know, to like add a pink ribbon or something like that. But the key thing was that as you're parading, if there's somebody you recognize or somebody you see on the side, you can take bits of your costume off and give it to them. And so then they too then become part of the whole, you know, and yeah, so there's much more to find out about that.
I just wanted to ask, how did your relationship with your work sort of change when you started looking at researching about carnivals and looking at your history and everything?
I think it was about intention. Yeah, I think it was about intention. So it's tricky, right? You know, it feels like when you're in the UK, when you're in because you have to remember as well that I'm coming from the Caribbean into the UK space, and that's a whole other set of dynamics that's going on there. And that transition in itself kind of forces you to look at yourself differently. So in Trinidad, I was an artist, full stop, didn't matter, right? And I was doing work and having exhibitions, and then coming here, it's like I had to be a Black artist, right? Do you understand? Right, so it's like, okay, yeah, I'm an artist, but I'm not just painting flowers and doing landscape, right? Okay, I'm a Black artist, right? What does that mean? You know, so it's like I had to, so in some ways it was kind of like, I don't want to say forced, but forged by the movement. I think there's something intrinsic that happens when you live and work outside of your home space, that one involves that you're acting and living through another layer of self, because you're presenting yourself or representing yourself again, you know. Yeah, so there's that. But I think that was kind of necessary work as well, because ultimately the work is about getting back to you, whatever that means, whatever this you is. It's about getting back to you. And what has shifted in my work is the acknowledgement of, much more the acknowledgement of where I'm coming from, not just about Trinidad, but about, you know, the ancestral journey and rediscovering, you know, ancestral rituals and the value of that, not necessarily in terms of being initiated or doing other, you know, anything like that, but in terms of the practice of it, the way, yes, just seeing differently. And I think that is where the work has shifted.
In terms of being known as a Black artist, I just wanted to hear your opinion more on that. What do you think about it, especially now in this time that we are?
At the moment, today, at 2:35, at this point in time, I feel that that I am kind of just doing what I have to do. I think being a Black artist at this time feels like it's probably a good thing, because there are things opening up and people institutes making deliberate efforts to see and to recognize and whatever. I think that's really powerful. I do sense that it's a phase, right? That it's gonna come and go, but I don't think that's what I'm gonna worry about. You know, I think for me, the realization of my Blackness in my work and with my work is it's now a deliberate kind of movement to do work that hasn't been done or that I don't see around me for those that come after me. So I'm really aware of my kind of like transientness in this space. And the conscious work for me is about, wait a minute, what is there for my boys? What is there for people like my boys? What is there? And so that is where, so it's a kind of a different shift. I'm less interested in the politics of what's happening in companies. I'm less interested in fixing white institutes. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in doing the work I need to do for the next steps for them, you know? And so that's where the Blackness and the political comes in.
I know that your name is of Yoruba descent, so I just wanted to ask like how that came about, if you know the story.
A funny part of this story, it's not really that funny, but recently, I say recently, in 2017, I did a project with, this is not the origin of my name, I'm just saying this on top of it, because we have 45 minutes, no, 15 minutes. So I did a project that was involving people from the diaspora coming to work together and have conversations. And as part of that, there was a guy from Nigeria a Yoruba man. And the first thing he said to me was, right, I need to teach you how to say your name properly, right? Because I'm saying Adeola and he's like, that's not how you say it, you know, kind of thing. So he was telling me the do, re, the re, mi, de, Adeola, right? So it's like Adeola, that's how I should say it. So that was really interesting. At first I was really defensive, like, it's my name, I've been using this for forever. But then I was like, it's great to be humble and to learn, and you're never too old to relearn, and to accept what that means. My name means crown of honor. This crown has honor. And if I'm not saying it right, then I'm not saying it. You know what I mean? I'm not claiming that. So yeah, but I was born in the 70s, late 70s. And in Trinidad at that time, it was very much awareness of Black power and that kind of thing. And so my parents made deliberate decisions to name their children African names, really, because they know where we come from.